Hello, welcome to this virtual reading for the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula. Typically, fall is a good time to sit down and read a book in these cold days as winter approaches. However, because of the pandemic this year, we've got to make a few changes. And so this year we've decided that we're going to have a virtual book sale. And in that spirit, we're going to have a few people read different things to you from the books that are for sale. And I particularly have one book that will be for sale, and it is called Speaking Ill of the Dead, Jerks in Montana History. And I looked through there and I found a story about a lady from Missoula. And she's quite the character. And there's one instance in her life that I would like to talk to you about. And I'll read you some. First of all, I'll give you a little background on who she is. Her name is Mary Gleam. Her original name was Mary Gleason. She was born in Ireland in 1845. Later on, she married John Edgar Gleam, who was a man of some wealth, but as she said, not a lot of brains. So what we decided to do is she came over to Missoula, and at that time they were building railroads and all kinds of things. So Missoula was a hotbed with lots of things going on here with men coming through. She managed to take some of Mr. Gleam's money and buy some real estate. And so she was involved in boarding houses and brothels and all kinds of activities, some legal, some not. So, but she had competitors, there was others in the area. It's that time of our history as the town was just beginning to grow and there was lots of people flowing through. But one particular guy named C.P. Bobby Burns, they just didn't get along at all. So what happened was, in the early morning hours of February 12th, 1894, Missoula's red light district was rocked by an explosion that leveled the home of Bobby Burns, with Bobby Burns in it. Burns miraculously survived the blast and immediately offered a $500 reward for information leading to the capture of the culprits. Local newspapers indicate that he had a pretty good idea who was behind it. 2 arrests were made within a few weeks. Authorities took into custody a Patrick Mason, a longtime resident of the area they called the Badlands, and William Reed, a black private in the 25th Infantry stationed at Fort Missoula. The Missoula County Sheriff held Mason without bond, but later released Reed on his own recognizance. Reed proved to have played a smaller role in the attack and the officer's first thought. He subsequently became a key witness for the persecution. It was not until August of 1894 that the case moved to trial, and the full details of the conspiracy were revealed. Mary Gleam then was accused of orchestrating the plot to kill C.B. Burns, despite the fact at the time of the explosion she was in San Francisco looking after some financial holdings. Officers took Mother into custody and held her until bond could be secured. She requested that a wealthy Missoula attorney sign as bondsman. He would have signed for her, but the judge in the case objected. He ruled that the attorney, who was currently practicing before the district court, could be held in contempt and severely fined if he provided Mary's bond. As a result, Mary could not find a bondsman, and she remained in custody until trial. Despite this setback, the ever-resourceful Ms. Gleam kept herself occupied. Local reporters noted that Mary entered the jail with enough booze to keep her quite happy for several days. Upon consuming her libations, she spent the first evening verbally abusing the only other female inmate, a woman who was to be transferred to the state pen the next day. After spending that charming evening with Mother Gleam, the woman was probably more than happy to be on her way to a quieter accommodation at Deer Lodge. Mary used her wealth to secure expert counsel for her defendant, her co-defendant, Patrick Mason, who was throughout his trial surrounded and defended by some of the brightest legal talent in the state. Despite this legal dream team, Pat Mason was convicted and received the maximum sentence of 14 years. He was swiftly escorted to the state prison in Deer Lodge, notwithstanding legal attempts to postpone it until Ms. Gleam's trial. The judge stated that Missoula County Jail was not a safe place for a man like Mason. So, Gleam's lawyers prepared for her trial with the conviction of her accomplice already on the books. Her impressive legal representation included Judge Newton W. McConnell of Helena, Judge K. Wood of Missoula. The team set about to build the same kind of legal web that Mary had used in the past. They first requested that Mary be released on her own recognizance, as her considerable girth, remember I said she was 5'4" and 200 pounds or so, made it impossible for her to hide. They attempted to gain both a continuance and a change of venue. All three requests were denied. And the trial was set for Friday, September 8, 1894. With a small army of witnesses, the prosecution solidly established the connection between Patrick Mason and Mary Gleam. Unfortunately, Mary had never been careful about how loudly she expressed her opinions about Mr. Burns, or what might have been done to remove him. Several prostitutes and former employees were brought in to testify about threats and the plotting that they had overheard, including the discussion of poisoning Mr. Burns with sugar. The prosecution also provided several eyewitnesses' accounts of the destruction wrought on by the residents. By this time, William Reed, the black soldier arrested, had been cleared of all charges. In return, he delivered the most damning testimony of the trial. Under oath, Reed stated that Patrick Mason had confessed the plot to him while they shared a jail cell at the Missoula County Jail. The private provided all the particulars of the plot concocted by Mason and Gleam to kill Bobby Burns. Mary's lawyers put her on the stand as the final witness for the defense, but rather than making a show of good character and pleading innocence, she used the platform to expound on her particular theories. Mary described a conspiracy that kept her on the wrong side of the law for no other reason than she dared to defend herself from the constant attacks of those wishing to destroy her. On September 4th, 1894, Mary was found guilty. The following day, the judge sentenced her to 14 years at hard labor at the state penitentiary. Given her infamous bad humor, many observers believed that Mary would lose her composure and explode, but instead, she could not be moved to make even a statement on her own behalf. When all the people around her gasped at the severity of the sentence, Mary remained calm. Although it was impossible to know what was transpiring in her mind, it seems unlikely that Mary was looking forward to her stay in Deer Lodge. Perhaps her pride would not allow her to give the court the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. Perhaps she had another card to play. Nonetheless, on September 16, 1894, Mary entered the women's portion of the state penitentiary. Her attorneys immediately filed an appeal of the guilty verdict. In November of that same year, the petition was heard at the 4th District Court in Missoula. The basis of the appeal was that one of the jurors was not a citizen of the United States, and that two of the principal witnesses for the prosecution were convicted felons. The suit was dismissed. Mary's lawyers quickly appealed that to the Montana Supreme Court. The Supreme Court overturned the lower court's decision and granted Mrs. Gleam a new trial. Because most of the witnesses had long since left the area, observers considered her retrial a mere formality, and Mary's freedom was assured. On October 30th, 1895, Mary Gleam made a triumphant return to Missoula for her new trial. In an interview with a Missoulian reporter, she stated, "There's not a woman in the world who has been more persecuted than I. I have lots of data laid aside. I will show to the people when the time comes. They have had their day. Mine is coming." Well, when asked about her upcoming trial, Mary coldly remarked again, "I have no fear of the results of the new trial. Two of the witnesses were hired to swear against me, have committed suicide, and God only knows where the rest are." Mary's new counsel, Edwin Toole of Helena, was successful in reducing her bond from $15,000 to $7,000. Mary promptly paid this amount and she was released. Awaiting her retrial, her first act as a free woman was to regain control of her buildings in the Badlands. She had transferred ownership of the properties to her husband while she was in prison. With deeds in hand, Mary was back in business. While waiting for her new trial, Mary could not keep herself out of trouble. Within months, she brutally attacked one of her tenants, French Emma, nearly killing the woman. When French Emma made her court appearance nearly 2 weeks later, she resembled, as the Missoulian stated, a piece of high decorative art, her eyes black and swollen with a deep brown-colored oil painting covering the side of her nose. One of her hands were lacerated, which were said to have been done by Mary's teeth. During the trial, Mary testified in an encounter a knife had fallen out of French Emma's dress, a knife which Mary believed Emma was going to use to kill her. Mary said she could further believe that the visit was part of a plot cooked up by Bobby Burns to get rid of her once and for all. According to Mary, the reason that she viciously beat the petite Miss Emma was self-defense. On March 1st, 1896, Mary was found guilty of assault and fined $250. She paid $300 in attorney's fees, and a few days later, an anonymous note appeared in the Missoulian. French Belly, James Hayes, and scores of others who testified against Miss Graham will please change their Front Street addresses. I remember she owned a boarding house in numerous places, and they decided time to leave. A request that was promptly heeded, no doubt. 2 weeks later, Mary Graham received a real stroke of luck. Bobby Burns, the only remaining material witness in the attempted murder case, died of a heart attack. On May 23, 1896, the state dropped its case against Mary, and she became a truly free woman again. For 8 months, Mary managed to behave. Then in February 1897, she embroiled herself in a new rash of assault cases, 1 verbal, 1 second degree, 1 third degree, and after this flurry, however, she failed to appear on the Missoula County Jail Registry until 1905, when she was indicted as a co-defendant in an assault with intent to kill case. In this instance, mother and 2 men were accused of assaulting C.A. Clayton by entering the plaintiff's house and with a bludgeon, loaded weapons, and an instrument did cruelly and maliciously, wantonly, and unlawfully assault him. Violent hitting, hammering, and striking him on the shoulders, in the face, the head, and neck. Mary once again claimed self-defense. Once again, she attributed her woes to a conspiracy. After some deliberation, the jury found Miss Graham and her co-defendants not guilty. This time, our heroine, at the age of 60, had narrowly escaped the possibility of a second prison term. In 1895, Mother Graham had reported to the press while awaiting the Bobby Burns retrial that she gladly would leave Missoula if she were set free. However, she never did leave. And on February 22nd, 1914, Mary Graham died of influenza in a hovel on West Front Street at the age of 69. Despite the fact that Mary had recently lost a $135,000 investment in a failed brick-making business, attorneys estimated her assets at more than $148,000. This was in 1914. Those dollars are comparable today to several $1 million. She died without a will, leaving a niece and a nephew to dig through her diverse assets. And they found out, it included property in Missoula, St. Ignatius, Ronan, Sanders County, and Canada. Mary Graham's obituary pays tribute to her considerable physical strength, her education, her financial, and spontaneous acts of kindness. The acts of kindness are not specified, however, so it's difficult to bestow praise on where it might be due. Even in death, Mary stirred up life in Missoula. She had long been credited with making a substantial request that her tombstone face the railroad, when all the nearby headstones faced the opposite directions. So her boys could wave goodbye to her, she says. Since she had left no will, however, this request cannot be substantiated. These community memories may stem from a need to remember the dead kindly or to fit local personalities into the larger myth of the West. All right, well, that's that book. Now, don't forget, we will have a virtual book sale. And so you can go to fortmissoulamuseum.org/virtual book sale. This will allow you to look at some of the books we have for sale, including this one, which is edited by David Walters. Okay, if you enjoyed this, please tell your friends about it and take a look at the books we have for sale. This is our only fundraising we have this year. Thank you very much.